Resource Damage Restoration Council meeting. My name is Pat Kneen. I'm an environmental scientist for the Montana Department of Justice. And tonight we have two great speakers with us. The first one is the director of the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program, Matt Benson. And he's going to just tell us a little bit about Silver Bow Creek Fishery. And then we'll have Joe Naughton, who is an MSU graduate student with the Department of Ecology. And he's going to tell us about his fish population survey. And also in the crowd tonight we have Jason Lindstrom, Upper Clark Fork Watershed fish biologist, and also Trevor Selch as a fish pollution biologist. And they'll be able to, they won't be presenting tonight, but they will be able to field questions if you guys have any. Just a few notes, the restrooms are back here in the corner. Two exits if we have to get out of here, up the ramp and out the door, and also right out here onto Broadway. There also is another restroom if you go out this door just to the right. So without any further ado, Matt Benson. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks for having me. When Pat invited me to speak initially, I asked him, well, what exactly do you want me to cover? And he told me I had about 45 minutes, and then he gave me a list that you guys, anyone's ever heard me speak before, it would have taken me a few hours probably. Furthermore, the part of it was about fish 101, which I could give a talk on that, but I kind of, if you guys have seen that Robert Goulet imitation that Will Ferrell does on Saturday Night Live, that's kind of like hiring a clown to fix the leak in your John, which is why it's good to have Jason and Trevor and Joe here, who are real fisheries biologists. So with that said, I guess I'll just tell you, I'm going to focus my talk more on an anecdotal overview of Silver Bow Creek's fishery, dating back to as far as I can not remember. I wasn't here, so. But we're going to go way back, and then we're just going to kind of track through, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that's been done on Silver Bow Creek with respect to the fisheries. And then I say anecdotal because I am a Butte native, and I grew up learning how to fly fish on Blacktail and Basin creeks, which are, you know, the two headwater streams to Silver Bow Creek. And I've been working in the Superfund realm here in the Upper Clark Fork Basin for the last 16 years. And I can honestly say, when I first started this job back when I was working for the Water Quality District at the Health Department in Butte here, I did not think I would ever be catching trout on Silver Bow Creek. So while things aren't 100% perfect and there's still some work to be done, the amount of progress that has been made is pretty impressive, looking at what this place started as. And I like to see, I'm happy to see a bunch of young folks in here tonight. I know you were given extra credit for it, but you know, you guys ought to pay attention to this, because your grandparents and my grandparents called Silver Bow Creek Shit Creek because there was nothing but turds floating down it. And now, with the work that a lot of people have been doing for the last almost 30 years, cleaning up this headwaters area of the Clark Fork Basin, there are actually opportunities to go out and catch trout in Silver Bow Creek, and it's only going to get better, and it's going to be up to you guys to take care of it once it's all said and done. So, a little longer intro than I had planned, but given that I hadn't planned one, I guess I'm right on schedule. So, once upon a time, this is where I said I'm going to go back to as far as I can't remember. So, the Salish and Kootenai tribes were the original people here, and if you read up and talk to some of their cultural elders and hear their creation stories go back to when the glacial Lake Missoula flood broke, which is about 15,000 years ago in the last ice age. So they've been here a long time. These are some photos that were taken from the Mansfield Library over in Missoula, showing some Salish tribal folks fishing in some areas down on the upper Columbia River. But these were the methods that were used in the larger rivers, like even the Clark Fork. The big dip nets and these big two-prong spears. When we restore things, restoration, we try and bring it back to a condition that was what it was like before any of these impacts caused by civilization occurred. And so you can, whereas I don't think you would think of American Indians as traditional scientists, there was a lot of science or biology, at least, in a lot of their place names. And so their place name for the confluence where the Big Blackfoot River and the Clark Fork River came together. They didn't call those rivers that, by the way. Was called the place of the big bull trout. And so, you know, these guys were probably fishing for salmon in this photo, but most of the time, you know, they were catching big bull trout at the confluence, which is about 100 miles downstream here, with these big dip nets and these spears. And then in some of the smaller tributary streams, how many of you have heard of places called Fish Trap Creek? Well, the fish trap was another real common method. And so between the dip net, the spear, and the fish trap, that was their most successful ways of fishing. Back to place names and telling us what areas of our environment today might have been like 15,000, or even, you know, probably we could go back to prior to just before Lewis and Clark came, wondering what this area might have been like before then. The Salishes place name for Silverbow Creek up in this area, the Summit Valley, was the place where you shoot them in the head. And they called it that. Out of all of their tribal lands, the areas that they lived upon, this was the one area that was so special. There were so many big bull trout in these clear waters. There was one of, if not the only place, where they could shoot them in the head with a bow and arrow, and divert away from their standard practices. So if you can believe that, Silverbow Creek used to be quite the place as far as fishing was concerned. And then things changed a little bit. This is an early photo of Silverbow Creek. When I was working for the planning department here at Butte Silver Bow, I remember I actually assigned a project to, and it was all related to this Metro storm drain. At some point in the Superfund, which is a very political process, the Metro storm drain name took the place of what used to be the old historic Silverbow Creek channel. And so I assigned a group of students at Montana Tech to do a historical research to see if they could find where the original path of Silverbow Creek ran. And lo and behold, it was fairly close to where the Metro storm drain was. But the first USGS maps, which we're going to see some slides here that relate to those first USGS topographical maps in a few slides here. But 1877 is when they did those. This was in 1906, and in 1864 was when they first found gold on Silverbow Creek. So this article was written, you know, about 40 years after they first discovered gold on Silverbow Creek, and you know, there was actually a settlement in this area. And so this is the story of how Silverbow Creek got its name. If you've ever, I know most people are from Butte here, but since everybody isn't, I won't play the Butte game and say, you know, where so-and-so lives. But there's, where Interstate 15 digresses from Interstate 90 and starts going south to Dillon. On your west, just as you cross the bridge that Silverbow Creek is under, you'll see there's a little butte there, and it's called Sherman Butte. And so what happened was this fall day in 1864, the first group of miners, and there's an actual granite marker there that shows it's placed fairly closely to where the first gold was found on Silverbow Creek, is the Barker Party, which included these gentlemen, this gentleman that's named here. They staked out their claims after they found the gold, because, you know, you got to stake your claim or it's it's open market. And they climbed up to the top of that butte, which overlooked the creek. And this is a photo from 1906. And so the way that this story in the Anaconda Standard tells is that they said that right below the butte, the creek made a big bend up to the north. And this was in 1864, so the Indians had used this area more than white people or non-Indians at that time. And there was actually a trail that cut through the big bow in the river. And one of them in the party said that it was in the setting sun, said it's beautiful, it looks just like a silver bow. And after you stake your claim, you got to file your claims. And in order to file your claims, you have to name the mining district. And so 7-Up Pete Slater, who I think he made the rounds in the Montana mines, because you've heard of the 7-Up Pete mine up by, although there could have been more than one 7-Up Pete, I imagine. But anyway, he said a silver bow it is, and that's what we'll call this creek. So that's where it changed from the name, place where you shoot them in the head, to silver bow. And then things really changed. Silver Bow Creek became an industrial sewer as the Copper Kings and America's second industrial age, the electrical industrial age, took hold. By the turn of the 20th century, 1900, there was at least a dozen major concentrators, smelters, and precipitation plants along Silver Bow Creek. Clark's, William A. Clark, one of the Copper Kings, Colorado smelter, and his reduction works or concentrator were the largest on the creek. And this is also where that nice name that your great-grandparents or my grandparents might have used to use came from. This was way before there was such thing as a sewage treatment plant. And so Silver Bow Creek, not only was it the place where these concentrators discharged their non-metals bearing or their non-profit metals bearing mineral waste, it was also where all of the city's sewage went. So it was not good. Copper Creek was another name that used to be used for the stream. And so this is a good photo that shows what Silver Bow Creek looks like. How many of you would think that classifies as a creek? It's just it's a ditch. It's part of the infrastructure of these concentrators, and it was before there were any environmental laws. So I mean, it was all about getting as much copper produced as quickly as possible, and the environment suffered, I guess. And then things got even worse. This is just a quick overview for, we could really get into just how far this was spread. But in 1908, biggest flood on record in this area. I mean, and the biggest flood on non-Indian record. Obviously, the glacial Lake Missoula flood was a lot bigger than this, but this was a massive flood. It was before they started doing USGS 24-hour flows, but they estimate that the flow that was top, and this is again, this is the place of the big bull trout, about 100 miles downstream from here. That's the newly constructed Milltown Dam. Underneath that tidal wave of water, they estimated that the flow of the Clark Fork at that point was 48,000 cubic feet per second. And dating back to when they did start doing the 24-hour monitoring for the Clark Fork River in the early 1920s, the highest flow they've ever had on record is about 28,000 CFS, so almost twice as much. And so what it did was, we could do this real quick here. You look at these areas like this where you just have, miles and miles of nothing but waste, and you get a flood like that, it picks all of those wastes up and just moves them downstream. And early in the basin, where you're talking about little streams like Silver Bow Creek, as soon as the waters started to subside, so did the load that the creek was carrying. And so Silver Bow Creek, for its entirety, 22 miles of it is being totally rebuilt. There's been a lot of progress on that since it began over 10 years ago. But the impacts from this flood and what was going on in Butte and Anaconda stretched all the way downstream to the Milltown Dam. And I think there's probably folks who could show you data that can prove that it went beyond that. But as far as the lawsuit and the Superfund site is concerned, Milltown Dam, about 110, 120 miles downstream, if you include the Anaconda distance, is the largest or one of the largest complexes of environmental cleanup sites in the United States of America. And it was pretty nasty on Silverbow Creek. Real rough estimates, about 10 million cubic yards of waste material is laying throughout Silverbow Creek and the Clark Fork River and what was behind Milltown Dam. Half of that is on Silverbow Creek, which is, you know, the headwater stream, so the smallest section of the Clark Fork River. So it was a lot worse the closer you were upstream. That's what all of this is what I just said. These are some photos of what it looked like pre-restoration, and there are some sections down where Highway 1 crosses the creek near Anaconda, where you can still kind of see things like this. Not quite as thick deposits of tailings, but you know, these are you know, 4 feet thick, and what were the deepest deposits in the Ramsey Flats, Greg? 12 feet? 15 feet thick of tailings, all washed down by one flood. And then what happens is, because there's no plants to transpire the moisture through the soil and back into the atmosphere, it'll soak into those wastes. All the metals will dissolve into the pore water, and then the water will evaporate and leave, you know, metals don't evaporate, not in atmospheric conditions, so it leaves this nice, pretty metal crust, salt crust on the surface, which is just waiting to be dissolved and washed back into the stream or back into the groundwater. So really, there was not only no longer enough trout to where you could shoot them in the head with the bow and arrow at this point. There was nothing in Silverbow Creek. In fact, there were no real changes there were some physical settling ponds that were put in the 19s to kind of satisfy some lawsuits that were being filed against the Anaconda Company back in the early 1900s. But that was just kind of like stopping the physical tailings from going downstream. The dissolved metals were still in the water. 1972, with the passage of the Clean Water Act, that's the first time the Anaconda Company ever did any sort of chemical treatment with their water, and they started adding lime and tweaking the pH to where it was kind of neutral. And so as part of that, I wonder if you've seen the report. It was from a guy out of MSU. Started from 1972 to 1981, they started doing macroinvertebrate recolonization studies throughout the entire Silverbow Creek, and it took them, I believe, 9 years before they even saw a living organism in the stream after they started chemically treating it. So there were no trout. This is you know, real indicative of what some of the riparian areas. Most streams have these pretty green stream banks. Well, you can see that Silverbow Creek might have had that at one point, but these are willows that just got fried by the acids and the metals that were in the tailings. Now this is where I digress a little bit further out than just Silverbow Creek, because I know the Butte Council here is interested in more than just Silverbow Creek. And so this is I guess a myth I'm hoping to dispel here. Silverbow Creek, right? It's the cleanup that starts here in Butte and goes all the way downstream to Warm Springs. And actually, if you want to technically understand where Silverbow Creek ends, a lot of people talk about all the huge fish that they catch in the Clark Fork right below the Warm Springs ponds. They're actually catching those huge fish in Silverbow Creek, because the Clark Fork doesn't start for about a half a mile downstream of there when Warm Springs dumps in. So it's kind of a technicality when you say there's no fish in Silverbow Creek, because people have been catching big fish out of that tailwater below the Warm Springs ponds for quite some time. But from that area of where Silverbow Creek flows into the Warm Springs ponds, funny thing is there's not a drop of water in that entire creek that is actually Silverbow Creek. Blacktail Creek is the only I guess in Basin Creek, because Basin Creek flows into Blacktail Creek near Father Sheehan Park. But Blacktail Creek is the only perennial stream that now drains the Summit Valley. Metro storm drain is what's left of Silverbow Creek. This was a graphic that was done by the Bureau of Mines some time ago, but you can see these little headwater streams. This is Rampart Mountain, East Ridge. You can see the Big Butte right here. And this would be Silverbow Creek right here. And this is from that 1877 original USGS topographic map. This is what happened to, and so for a long time, Silverbow Creek, it was channelized like you saw in those early photos, but it was used as an industrial sewer. But even so, at least it had original Silverbow Creek water in it and was still continuous as it relates to being the headwater stream of the Clark Fork. 1955, what started here in Butte? You guys in the cheap seats. What started in Butte in 1955? None of you? Dave? Berkeley Pit. This graphic is 5 years old anyway. That's what happened to Silverbow Creek once they started digging the Berkeley Pit and piling up the wastes that would become the Yankee Doodle's tailings pond. And so, you know, shortly after that started, there was no such thing as Silverbow Creek. There's a little tail section of the creek, I don't know how long it is, quarter mile, half a mile, that flows into the Yankee Doodle tailings pond, but that's the only real Silverbow Creek water. So it kind of remains in name only. And so we'll talk about relative restoration here eventually. If we really want to restore Silverbow Creek, well, I think there's probably not enough money to do that. But we are going to and have been doing a pretty darn good job given the limitations.